So, I think the vanilla version of Fia's questline would look something like this. Rogier and Dee go to the Round Table Hold. They talk about each other. Fia tells you about the knife print, which you give to Rogier, who asks you to spy on Rani. Rogier dies and leaves a letter telling you about the location of the Prince of Death and his brother, Devin. After the Radan festival, Fia gives you the weather dagger, you pass it along to Dee, Fia kills Dee, then leaves for the nameless Eternal City. You give Devin the armor, Fia summons Rogier and Lionel as champions, you give her the Hollow Brand, fight Fortisax, and get the Mending Rune. Devin kills Fia, you kill Devin. That should be the base, natural progression of her questline, right? And I think the most commonly accepted standard interpretation of these events would be along these lines. Regarding Rogier, he gets Death Blighted for disturbing the Prince of Death in Stormveil, starts confiding in Fia, and tells her about the Black Knife print. She knows where to find it, but since Rogier can't walk, she tells you about it instead. Rogier learns from the print that Rani was behind the Knight of Black Knives, and would, therefore, have a curse mark on her body. Then guesses where she might be and gets you to spy on her, in hopes of finding the curse mark, so he can complete his research. And, even though he was right about all of it, he dies before you can give him the curse mark. Regarding Fia, she wants to save those who live in death, who are generally considered to be the reanimated dead skeletons we find in game. And when you meet with her in the Deep Root Depths, even though she had found a Hollow Brand in the Round Table Hold, she doesn't know how to find the other one. Luckily, though, Rogier has pointed you in the right direction, so you give her Rani's curse mark. Regarding Dee, since he had found the mark of the centipede in Summonwater Village, then Dee had found Godwin's Hollow Brand there, which Fia later stole from him before leaving the hold. Regarding Devin, he would have braved the Eternal City while hunting those who live in death, and was traumatized when he witnessed what had become of Godwin's body. And finally, regarding Lionel, he found Fia after a long journey and pledged himself to the cause of his long-lost daughter, becoming one of her champions. Which is also possibly a Sigmire and Sieglind Easter egg. I mean, the vibes are there, right? Okay, that framework is going to be our foundation, and we're going to start by adding some lore to it now. Let us start by talking about Fia and the Prince of Death. And the first thing to notice here is that Fia has some undisclosed followers in the game. In Altus, there are omens and commoners garbed in black who cast Fia's Mist in front of a minor Erdtree in the capital outskirts, and a bunch of these omens down in the Auriza hero's grave. They're not explicitly stated to be associated with Fia, but their clothes and their spellcasting, they're like dead giveaways, right? Not to mention that the lower capital church, where we get Fia's deathbed dress, is located literally in front of the well leading down to the Shunning Grounds, which puts Fia directly into contact with the Omen. Okay, now, what are these followers of Fia doing there? Well, the minor Earth Tree doesn't seem to have any particular interest to them, as far as I can tell. I think it's just in the general vicinity of the hero's grave, which is the location they seemed to care about. Auriza is relevant because, as I have explained before, Godwin was originally buried there. The Golden Epitaph's word is a very blatant piece of evidence, given that it is a literal epitaph meant to commemorate the death of Godwin the Golden. Then there are the crabs in the nearby lake where you fight the Dunk Eater. Those crabs have the face of the Prince of Death on their backs, which isn't exclusive to this location, but other instances of this kind of crab are found around Deathroot, which is apparently absent here, which leaves Godwin, aka the Prince of Death, aka the source of Deathroot, as the next more likely reason for these crabs to be here. And lastly, in Auriza, we get to fight Ordovis, one of the two honored as foremost among the Crucible Knights, which is relevant because his counterpart, Siluria, is currently located in the Deeproot depths, and the two of them together make a pattern where one Crucible captain guards Godwin's first bearing place, while the other one guards the current one. Okay, so Fia was looking for the Prince of Death. That makes sense, right? But this scenario also raises a few questions. Why did they bury him in Auriza? Why did they move him? Is there a deeper connection between Fia and the Prince of Death? And all of these questions are reasonable, yes, but there's another question, a stranger question, the one you should really be asking yourself right now, whose answer solves all previous ones. Why did they even bury him in the first place? Like, technically, Godwin wasn't dead, right? Right? He died in soul only, which means his body was, and still is, very much alive. So, they did a night of black knives. They sacrificed Godwin and a bunch of other demigods, and they expected to get a mending rune out of it that could grant the power of Destined Death to the Outer God of Grace, who is the current incarnation of the Greater Will, and who currently holds control over the Elden Ring. I've been over all of this before, but Ranni sabotaged the ritual, and they only got half a rune and a bunch of dead corpses out of the deal. Right? Godwin wasn't supposed to die in soul only, he was supposed to die a true death, as a martyr to Destined Death. So, Ranni's actions are an act of sabotage. And that creates some problems, right? First of all, the general population isn't privy to most of this information. All they know are rumors of assassins running around killing demigods. And we know what Ranni did, but the other demigods didn't. So, what did they do? Well, they did a PR move and scrambled to try and fix the situation the best they could. They buried Godwin with honors in a hero's grave, the public gets their celebration, they think Godwin's dead. And heroes' graves give you access to the roots of the Earth Tree, which are known as the roots of the Great Tree, but Great Tree is a mistranslation, so it's just the Earth Tree. And they could use those roots to try and infuse Godwin's body with grace, in hopes of undoing whatever fucked up body horror transformations he was going through. Right? You get an Earthtree burial, you tap into the system, Grace will fix this shit. But it didn't. And that's where Fia comes in. And in order to talk about Fia in this context, we gotta talk about Fortissax real quick. So, we get to fight Fortissax inside Godwyn's head. And that's not presented as a figment of Godwyn's imagination or anything like that. That's not just a weird dream born from a sleep of death. Remembrance of the Lich Dragon clearly states that the ancient dragon fought long and hard against death within its companion. I mean, Fortissax even has a remembrance of its own, right? Okay, cool, but how though? How did Fortissax enter Godwyn's mind to fight Deathblight in the first place? Well, luckily for us, the game provides us with the clearest possible precedent for this scenario, Fia, the Deathbed Companion. She gets us inside Godwyn's head. And not just inside, but to the exact same location where Fortissax is. So, if she's our ticket into Godwyn's head, then she can be reasonably assumed to have taken Fortissax there as well. Especially considering she was stationed in Leyndell at some point. That's where we find her dress. And while it isn't unreasonable for her to be at the capital, it is a bit strange. Like, when the Tarnished started coming back to the Lands Between, they had their mission, and you get some cooperation with Leyndell, you get some fighting, but Fia? She's not a warrior, she's not a, what possible use could anybody have for her in this scenario? Well, she's a deathbed companion. She lays with the remains of exalted nobles to grant them another chance at life. That's her job description, the purpose of her being. They brought her in to do what she spends the whole goddamn game trying to do again. Her job in Leyndell was to lay with Godwyn. They tried the roots in Orisa. When that didn't work, they tried deathbedding. When that didn't work, they tried Fortissaxing. And then, finally, when that didn't work, they went back to basics and moved him to the Deeproot Depths. Orisa didn't work, but we can find bigger, better roots. Roots closer to the Earthtree itself. More roots, more heals. That will do the trick. Right, guys? Alright. I think that's a good start. I think it adds a lot of context to the relationship between Fia and the Prince of Death. And now we're going to add a bit more context to this scenario by talking about the Fallen Hawks. Didn't see that one coming, did you? So, the Company of Fallen Hawks were a band of slaves ordered to explore the Eternal City. And even though the game doesn't explicitly state which city they were supposed to explore, they can only be found in Nokron, so it's pretty safe to assume they were only ordered to explore that specific Eternal City. And given Nokron is located beneath Limgrave, and taking into consideration the Fallen Hawk's name and crest, the inverted hawk found in their heater and tower shields, it's also relatively safe to assume they came from Stormveil, which is implied to have been ruled by the Stormhawk King, not only by that king's ashes, but also by the Hawk Crest wooden shield, which describes its hawk as a long-forgotten crest of Stormveil. Okay, but who sent them down there and why? Well, since the Stormlord was defeated by Godfrey, then the Fallen Hawks are implied to have been enslaved after the fall of the Stormlord, right? They were enslaved after the rise of Marika, and considering they can be found alongside the Crucible Knights in the Siofra River Aqueduct, which leads to the Deeproot Depths, where another very important Crucible Knight can also be found, then it's implied that they are all part of the same group, and that these slaves were ordered to explore Nokron in order to find the way to those very same routes. Like, the Eternal Cities had long since been abandoned by all surface dwellers. There are no Golden Order outposts down there. So, when they decided to find the roots of the Eternals of the Erdtree, they had to start from scratch. And sending expendable slaves living in the fringes is perfect. It helps to maintain secrecy, and it doesn't matter how many of them get sniped down there. You can just keep sending more until they find a way. And they did, right? They found a way. They eventually found a way. So, they found a way, they brought Godwyn, they tried their best and failed again, and eventually they just gave up. The Sovereign Alliance fell apart, the kingdom was engulfed in war, they put this whole thing behind them, and they closed the door when they left. We don't know how the Fallen Hawks originally got up there from the Siofra River below, where we find the inverted Hawk heater shield, and the way gates in Lower Nokron only go in circles now, so if you wanna go up there too, good luck defeating Radahn. Right? They probably had some working way gates before, but now not so much. The way is shut. It was made by those who are dead, and the dead keep it, until the time comes. The way is shut. And an interesting side note here is that just like the path or what? I thought I heard something. Okay, an interesting side note here. Just like the path to Deeproot through Nokron was once known, but has since been lost, the same must have happened regarding the path to the Moonlight Altar through Nokstella, right? Now, Ranni needs to go through Nokron to get to Deeproot, to get to Nokstella, to get to the Grand Cloister, to get to the altar. That's a very convoluted way, but Nokstella is right there, right? Liurnia's deep well takes you to Nokstella. The Grand Cloister is directly beneath the Academy. You can even see the cloister when you go down Liurnia's deep well. The path to the altar is right there, and they must have had a way to get to it without having to go through Nokron. But then, given everything that's happened in recent history, given the return of Rot and the current state of the cloister, that path must have been lost too, and Ranni also needed to start from scratch. That's why she takes the detour. And the last thing I have to mention regarding this whole thing is that the Fallen Hawks may have been sent by Miquella. I had previously theorized Miquella may have sent them down there in the master plan video, but given the current scenario we're exploring, I think it's more likely he had originally done that in regards to Godwyn, which gave him the pre-existing knowledge he used to deploy his later plans. Like, Ranni coordinated the Night of Black Knives. But this all happened afterward, right? And not only the golden epitaph was likely left in Orisa by Mikela, but there's also the fucking rune bear down in the deep root as well. Why is there a rune bear down there? The one that dropped the Prince of Death's cyst? Why the fuck does it have a piece of Godwin's face? Well, if you've seen the Mikela's master plan video, then you might remember my theories regarding Mikela's many researches, which included a research involving the blood of rune bears stemming from the description of beast blood saying, fresh beast blood glinting with gold, this glimmering blood never rots or decays. So, that particular research ties into the whole let's try to heal Godwin by infusing his body with grace, right? And it helps to place Mikela in Deeproot, and it makes a pattern with the epitaph, and this whole scenario may even gives us a glimpse into the first cracks in Mikela's faith regarding the Golden Order. He seems to have genuinely believed in the faith at some point, but we know for a fact that he eventually had a change of heart. And this may have been where that started. He tried, he tried very hard. He tried to please Radagon, and he tried to follow Marika's plan, and he tried to heal Malenia with Grace, and he tried to heal Godwin, but Grace just failed him, time and time again, so he just gave up on it, So, we talked about the first and the last groups to get to Deeproot. The ones that brought Godwin down there and Fia looking for the Prince of Death later on. But there was yet another group in between those two, the Golden Order Fundamentalists. Within the ranks of these fundamentalists, there is a subsect that specializes in hunting those who live in death. They are mentioned in items like the Golden Centipede, which is described as being kept as a fetish by Golden Order fundamentalists, especially the hunters of those who live in death. And the sect left very obvious signs behind, indicating their passage through Nokron. There are the aforementioned Golden Centipedes, which are found in other areas of the Eternal Cities as well, implying their search spread far and wide. And in the Siofra Aqueduct specifically, we also find Order Healing and the Missionary's Cookbook that teaches you how to craft sacred Order pots. The Order Healing spell is one of the incantations of the Golden Order fundamentalists used by hunters of those who live in death, and the pots are highly effective against those who live in death. The Golden Order has no mercy for those who trespass beyond life's bounds. And this brother, Devin, is also there, and the D's themselves are hunters of those who live in death, and Devin gives you the inner order gesture. So, yeah, these fundamentalists have just objectively been there, right? And there are a few more items that can help bring a bit more context to it. First, there are Golden Centipedes in Deeproot 2, which means they actually made it that far. There are bird boats, in one of, I don't know how to pronounce that word, sorry, in one of the first corpses we find when we get to Upper Nokron, and these boats are specifically stated to have been used during the War of the Shattering, which gives us a more precise timeline regarding when these fundamentalists made their way underground. Like, The Prince of Death gives rise to Deathroot, which in turn gives rise to those who live in death, so the hunters of those who live in death have to have come after Godwyn was grafted to the roots of the Earth Tree, and, given the current state of the lands between, they have to have been active before we got there. But that's a big range, and those boats kind of pinpoint their activities in the timeline, right? There's another corpse holding rejuvenating boluses in Night's Sacred Ground, which is a bit off the path to the Deeproot, but it's also right there, right? After the Mimic Tier, if you go right, you get to the Aqueduct, and if you go left, you get to the Sacred Ground. And the recipe for those boluses comes from another missionary's cookbook, and they are used to combat the buildup of Death Blight. And even though there's no Death Blight in Nokron, which makes said boluses another very obvious indication of their very obvious goals. And in Deeproot, we also find another corpse holding dragon wound grease, and since there are no reasonable grounds for them to bring this item to this place without the presence of Fortisex, then it's implied they had expected to fight Godwyn's dragon buddy as well. And, just like with the Falling Hawks, there's the possibility Miquella was behind this act as well, since there's another missionary's cookbook that teaches you how to craft Heilig bone arrows and bows. And since these are Heilig arrows and bows, then there's the implied connection there. This connection would also give more context to the association between Dee and Gurranq, since Gurranq's location is a bit inaccessible, and the way gate leading to the Bestial Sanctum is supposed to be hidden, but Miquella would have used that same gateway during his invasion of Sellia, something I have explained before, which would then give Dee a way to know about it. Likewise, this connection also provides an explanation of how that fundamentalist sect would know about Deeproot in the first place, right? And the reason for Miquella to have propped up this sect, I think, is his habit of delegating tasks. Like, if he plans to eventually take over the Elden Ring and rule over the lands between, then removing Godwyn from the root system and dealing with the Deathroot infestation are both to his advantage, right? But his priority is his ascension, so he fucks off to deal with that and leaves these raving fanatics behind to deal with this problem for him. And they can also incidentally help with the gathering of that fruit for his researches, but that's not particularly relevant for this theory, so yeah. Now, these fundamentalists don't just provide context for the Deeproot Death situation, they intersect with Fia's questline, right? First through the Dee brothers, of course, but also through Rogier, whom I believe to have been a member of their expedition underground. Like, next to his bloodstain in Stormveil, we find the Prince of Death's pustule. And yes, there's another Prince of Death right there, but this pustule is said to have come from the face of Godwyn himself, which implies Rogier had been to Deeproot before. A conclusion that helps to explain his letter telling you about the location of both Devin and Godwyn. And that does not contradict the tenets of those fundamentalists, since the Academy was an ally to the Golden Order, something Rogier himself comments upon, meaning working with the likes of a filthy sorcerer like Rogier is fine. You know, it's fine. And lastly, I need to mention that the way to Deeproot through the Frenzied Flame conscription was likely not used by them, given both the secretive nature of that place and the fact that the coffin at the Great Waterfall Basin is a one-way trip, meaning they had to have come from the Siofra Aqueduct. This is something I felt I had to say this because of the single golden centipede that can be found in the Shining Grounds. No, there's one there in front of a little tombstone with an omen in front of it, which could have generated some confusion here. And I also need to mention that Devin was likely not among the fundamentalists who made it to Deeproot. I don't think he went that far, since, as previously stated, the coffin is a one-way trip, meaning his semi-catatonic state is not the result of having witnessed Godwin, but either trauma for having witnessed everybody else die, basically, the effects of his stupidly long period of isolation, just think quarantine, but many more years long, and or maybe even the simple consequence of not having his armor anymore. I don't know. Which brings us back to probably all of those combined, maybe. Which brings us back to Rogier, because that armor states about the D brothers that not once do they stand together, meaning Darian was not a part of the expedition. The D that we get to know first, he wasn't there because they don't stand together. But he got the armor anyway, right? He has the armor now. And if they don't stand together, and if he wasn't with them, and he didn't go down there to get the armor, how did he get it? Well, given the friendship between Darian and Rogier, then I think Rogier, who was a part of the expedition, was the one to have brought the armor to Darian after everything went to shit. Right? And that's that. The religious fanatics chasing after Godwin and the scholar who tagged along with them. Unbeknownst to them, one of their own would eventually provide Fia with the means to gestate her mending rune. And, unbeknownst to Rogier, one of his former buddies, the last known hunter of those who live in death, would ultimately be the end of Fia herself. Okay, the last piece of lore we can add to the standard progression and interpretation of Fia's questline regards the Black Knife print. When she tells you about it, she says dear Rogier likes to talk of it when abed. But she also says, in truth, I've heard tell from someone else about the Black Knife prints. Which seems to be true, considering she tells you where to find one, even though Rogier doesn't. So, where did she get this information? How does she know there's a print in the Black Knife catacombs? Well, one of the most interesting things about those catacombs is that the enemy there are commoners who are also necromancers. This is the only place they can be found, and the combination of commoner with necromancer is just off, you know? And I believe these guys worked with Fia. Like, they are literally raising those who live in death. No above-ground organization would be going around teaching commoners of all people how to raise those who live in death, right? They're kinda obviously a part of the same organization associated with Fia, so she had some dudes looking around for the prince, and they found one, and they told her, and she told you. And yeah. So, now that we've gone through the standard progression, we can start messing around a little bit. And the first thing I did in this exercise was, of course, to start a new game plus and immediately kill D as soon as he showed up. For science. Of course. And what happens is that if you kill D before Rogier moves to the hold, he won't leave you the letter talking about Devin. And if you kill D before you kill Radahn, Fia will move out of the hold as soon as the star shower hits the ground. Now, the bit about the letter seems reasonable, right? But the bit about Fia moving out actually means something else. In the standard progression, D had found the mark of the centipede in Summonwater Village. Then Fia killed D and stole the curse mark of death from him, with her later saying, Godwyn's hollow brand has since been recovered at the Round Table Hold. But even if D never moves to the hold with the mark he found, she still ends up with the same hollow brand and the same line of dialogue, meaning this mark of the centipede wasn't Godwyn's curse mark at all. Like, Rogier even calls this mark a symbol of the curse mark. The curse mark is the object in question, and the mark D found is a symbol of that object. These are two separate things. So, what I think happened is that Fia had actually recovered Godwyn's curse mark at the hold. Then D was the one who stole it from her, not the other way around. Then he chose to stay at the hold because there's a pact of non-aggression there, so he was like, shit, I found Godwyn's curse mark. I need to keep it safe. So I'm staying right here where nobody can hurt me. Ever. What he didn't know is that there are ways around the hold's security measures. Ensha attacks us there, Gideon kills Enya, and of course, Fia kills D. We don't know how to do it, but it's an objective fact that it can be done. Then there's the Weather Dagger. I think D used it when he stole the curse mark. I think he used it to pry it from wherever Fia was keeping it. It's even possible they kept a chunk of Godwyn meat with the mark on it at the hold, and D had to cut the mark out of his undying flesh. Either way, D left the dagger behind. Fia found the dagger. She knew it belonged to the thief, but not who the thief was. But she sees things. She knows we go around talking to people, so she's like, hey there, honey. I found this dagger somewhere. Would you mind giving it back to its owner? It would mean so much to me. And then, of course, we implicate D in the theft when we give him his dagger back. Then Fia kills D, gets the Hollow Brand back, and T-poses her way out of the building. And she's not dumb, so if we fail to point her in the right direction and progress the story enough, she eventually manages to find out about D on her own. And I'm assuming the mark D had found allowed him to find the curse mark at the hold, even though that's a bit speculative. And all of this combined explains how she ends up with her Hello Brand despite this absence. And it also explains why she needs to kill him before she leaves the hold if D moves there before you open the path to Nokron. Alright, the last progression experiment is analyzing what happens if Rogier moves to the round table hold after Fia has already left. And this is where things get interesting. The first thing we need to mention here is that when you meet Fia in Deeproot, she still summons Rogier as a champion, even if Rogier is still stuck in Stormveil. This means she had already embraced him prior to our arrival at the Hold and his incursion to Stormveil Castle. And, just like in the standard progression, she also doesn't mention the knife print in Deeproot. In the standard progression, the impression was that she didn't talk about it there because she had already talked about it at the Hold, right? But now, the impression is that she doesn't talk about the prints in Deeproot because she doesn't know we're working with Rogier, since she never got to see us talking to each other. Now, the really interesting part about all this comes when looking at it from Rogier's perspective, because the very first impression that we get is that he was a Death Scholar, who went looking for something in Stormveil that he had heard about somewhere, and then stumbled his way into getting Death-blighted, which luckily allowed him to decipher the knife print, which luckily we managed to find because Fia told us where to look for it, which luckily led us to the hollow brain that she needed to finish her quest line. But that's just one Deus Ex Machina after another, with a Mr. Bean type scholar thrown in the mix for good measure. Very poor writing. 3 out of 10. But now we know Rogier had a previous history with the Prince of Death, right? He was with the Fundamentalists. He's not just bumbling around, he kinda knows what he's doing. And not only that, but he had already come into contact with Fia before he got Death-blighted in Stormveil as well. And this new set of circumstances require a shift in perspective from our part. Right? Okay, so let's start by talking about an inconsistency in the standard interpretation that we haven't broached yet. Like, Rogier's condition allows him to decipher the knife print, and he's supposed to have gotten afflicted with Death-blight from, quote-unquote, disturbing the Prince of Death in Stormveil, right? I mean, he tells you that, right? But the thing is, Princes of Death don't afflict you with Death-blight. Like, sure, they might be the source of the powers that cause Death-blight, but the Princes of Death themselves don't inflict that status by themselves, no matter how much you choose to disturb them. You can hack 'em, slash 'em, beat 'em, burn 'em, freeze 'em, lightning bolt the living shit out of them, and they still won't inflict Death-blight on you. And even if they did, which they don't, but even if they did, Rogier didn't actually get Death-blighted in the sense that we have come to know it. His body got half suffused with death. He got half-blighted. Half-blighted. That's not how Death-blight works. You can't get a little bit blighted. The meter starts going up, and you start panicking, trying to find the right boluses in your pouch. Then the meter gets full, and bang! That's it. You're dead, son. That's the whole point of that status. That's what makes it so dangerous, right? And since the Prince of Death can't inflict Death-blight, and since Rogier also doesn't seem capable of doing that on his own, then we get the implication of a third party being involved. Someone else that could inflict him with Death-blight. And not only that, but since he got half-blighted, then he wasn't just afflicted with Death-blight. Something very specific happened to him, which is possibly corroborated by the Prince of Death's pustule we had mentioned before. Like, the pustule raises your defense against Death Blight. And since he's researching all this death stuff, then it makes sense for him to carry one of those around, right? But then what? It didn't work for him, and he just happened to drop it? Oops, there goes Mr. Bean losing his shit again. But if you're going to get half-blighted on purpose, then it kinda makes sense to get rid of the blight defense item, right? Right? Like getting the knife print to Rogier and him being able to decipher it were both supposed to have been accidents. But Fia already had people out there looking for these prints, and she had already embraced Rogier before he went to Stormveil. And the implication of a third party purposefully inflicting Rogier with Death Blight leaves us with the conclusion that none of these were accidents, that he was intentionally suffused with death with the express purpose of reading that print. What it looks like is that Fia was manipulating him into sacrificing himself so that she could advance her goals. Doesn't it? Just like she manipulates us into giving him the print too, like, there's a Black Knife assassin guarding the print, so she sends you to retrieve it for her. But she's considered an outcast. Their collaboration isn't public, so she doesn't tell you to give it to him, but she's all like, oh, I have no use for this print. I'm just a girl. Grain affairs are hardly my forte, but Rogier? Poor sweet Rogier. He cries when he talks about it. Did I tell you he fucking cries because of the fucking print? Rogier, your friend who gave you a cool sword, he fucking cries. Don't you want him to stop crying? What the fuck is wrong with you? I'm telling you what you do. I'm not telling you what you do with the print. That's crucial to my plans and that I had people looking for and that I sent you to retrieve. I'm just telling you that Rogier is going to cry if you don't give it to him. Right? And like, before we move forward, I think this is a good point to remind you that characters can and often do lie to you. In various ways and for different reasons. And Fia and Rogier are no exception to this. Right? I know some people like to take everything very literally and on its face, but these are people and people lie. Fia tricks you into being an accessory to murder with the Diffin, and Rogier literally tells you to your face that he can be a good liar when he needs to be. These people are not intrinsically trustworthy, and their word should not be taken at face value. Okay? Okay. Moving on. Next, we need to address yet another inconsistency in the standard interpretation. When Rogier deciphers the knife print, he learns that Runny was responsible for the ritual that created the blades used in the Night of the Black Knives, from which he deduces both that she was the one to have orchestrated that plot and also that, if Runny truly is the one who plotted that fateful night, then she should bear the curse mark of destined death somewhere upon her flesh. Now, the problem here is that these aren't reasonable deductions. Like, at all. This is such a leap of logic. Rogier is a terrible lore hunter. You don't just assume the blacksmith is the mastermind behind the whole war just because he made the blades they used. And given the peculiarities of said ritual, I could kind of squint real hard and give him the benefit of the doubt here, but then there's the curse mark. Okay, you've deduced she made the blades, and you assumed she was behind the whole thing just because of that. How the hell do you go from that to surely she must have carved out her own goddamn flesh and given herself a freaking curse mark of death? She couldn't possibly have stabbed somebody else with the blade of fucking death and left the curse mark in the farthest possible hiding spot she could find. No, she should bear the curse mark of death and death someone upon her own flesh. Come on, man, come on. Either Mr. Bean strikes again and gets everything right, despite being the worst detective in town, or there's something else going on that Rogier simply isn't telling us about. Right? So, the fuck is going on here? Well, Rogier is in the possession of two pieces of information that gave me pause. First, there's Ronnie's current whereabouts. Like, that's supposed to be a secret. Rogier himself will tell you in the same breath that Ronnie's whereabouts since the shattering are a well-kept secret, that she hasn't been seen even once, and then immediately guess where she is. And like, okay, that's scary manner. Once again, I could kind of let him have this one, but then there's the fact that if you pledge yourself to Ronnie before giving him the knife print, he'll no longer take the print from you. Like, he wants to trust you. He tells you that people want to trust you, that he's seen it. And he does take a chance on you when he asks you to spy on Ronnie for him. But if you've already pledged yourself to her, then he just can't trust you with this anymore. You know? How could he just ask you to spy on the demigod waifu that rules your fate? He can't. So he doesn't. And he's half-blighted. His time was due any time now. And he can't walk, he can't go out looking for another helper, so he just gives up and dies. But how the fuck did he know that? How did he know you had pledged yourself to Ronnie? If he knows where she is, despite that being a secret, and if he knows you pledged yourself to her, despite that being personal information, then he must have been spying on her. Right? Even before he sends you there, he must have been spying on her. How else would he know these things? And Ronnie herself kind of corroborates this point. Like, she's no stranger to spycraft, I made a whole video about that, and she seems to know somebody is spying on her, trying to find the curse mark of death. Like, when you go to talk to her on your own, she asks you what the fuck you're doing there. Right? You barge into her house. And you're like, I don't know. Which makes you look kinda dumb. But you did make it all the way over there, past all the goddamn finger creepers and Loretta, and the freaking dragon just outside the tower. So, you must be competent. Even if you're not particularly bright. So, she takes a chance and hires you to help her dog find the Fingerslayer blade. But, when Rogier sends you to spy on her, and she asks what you're doing there, instead of playing it cool, you know, be a cool tarnished, you literally tell her to her face, you must be Ronnie the Witch, behind the Knight of Black Knives. Because we're such fucking spy masters. God damn, the tarnished is a fucking dumbass. To which she promptly replies, Sadly for thee, the curse mark thou seekest is not to be found here. She clocks you immediately. She immediately knew what you wanted. She looked at you and was like, they know I'm Rennie. I'm a fucking doll. And they know I'm Rennie. And they know about me in the Night of Black Knives. This dumbnut must be another one of those fucking spies. Right? And when Rogier sends you back there, she keeps on telling you to your face that she knows you're spying on her. She may not have known who was behind it, but she knew someone was spying on her. It was Rogier. Rogier was spying on her. This is how he knows about her location, about your pledge, and about her orchestrating the Night of Black Knives. Remember that the details regarding the Night of Black Knives were kept a secret from the general population. Of course, but the demigods were in on it. I've talked about this before. Marika had warned her kids. Shit was about to go down, in Marika's own words. Hear me, demigods, my children beloved. Make of thyselves that which ye desire, be it a lord, be it a god. But should ye fail to become aught at all, ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices. And they were indeed sacrificed, but they were also expecting to be resurrected, and their sacrifice was honorable. Luthel even got a hero's burial when she volunteered to keep serving one such demigod until their revival. This information was out there, and it's the kind of stuff Rogier could have learned through a mixture of research and spycraft. So, yeah. I know, this is a lot. But it explains a lot too. Regarding the stuff we were talking about, right? I hope you have been following everything for the diagram. I know it's a lot, I'm sorry. But, like, it still doesn't explain the curse mark, right? How did he know Runny had the curse mark on her body? And before we get to that, let me just say real quick that Runny taking you in, even though she knows you're spying on her, could be either because she needs help with Nokron or an attempt at some counter-espionage of her own, both of which would make sense to me, probably a little bit of both. But the fact she gives you the Carian inverted statue, which leads you to the curse mark on her original body, later on, like, it tells me that honestly, she doesn't care. Like, given her goals, you ultimately don't matter. You're irrelevant, and she just doesn't care. You can have your curse mark. You can have your mending room. If she succeeds with her plans, there will be no Elden Ring left for you to mend with your precious little room. And if she fails, she knows that it doesn't matter which room mends the Elden Ring. The same greater will still be in charge no matter what. In this scenario, you just don't matter. And she just doesn't care. Okay, now, in order to explain Rogier knowing about the curse mark, we need to expand a little bit on the knife prints. Like, if he was already spying on Runny, that means he already knew she had orchestrated the Night of Black Knives before you gave him the knife print, right? But if he went through the trouble of getting himself half-blighted, then that means he still needed to learn something from the prints. He needed to know who got stabbed with them. He already knew who made the blades, but if he could figure out the identity of the victims, then he could figure out whose body got the curse mark on their flesh. Right? Like, theoretically, the other victims, the other demigods in the mausoleums, their identity is easier to piece together because they're just out there, but someone is missing. One victim is missing from the list. the one that will have the curse mark, and that's how he figured out Rani was supposed to have the curse mark on her. That's why he needed the knife print, and that's why he got intentionally half suffused with death. And that's almost the whole of it regarding this particular subject. Right? We know now how he knew all of this stuff. We know that he was spying on her, how he figured out why he needed the blade, why he got half blighted, what he wanted to find out, how he found out where the curse mark was. But we can expand on this spycraft just a little bit further, just for context, okay? So, I think that part of Rogier, well, it's not just for context, that's a lie. I think part of Rogier spying on Rani was done through the Academy. Like, Rogier is considered a heretic now. But he's a noble and a scholar and a glintstone sorcerer, so I think he was with the Academy at some point. At the very least, he must have been when he was running around with the Golden Order fundamentalists, right? And in the catacombs where the necromancers had located the knife print for Fia, we also get the Twin Sage ashes, which is a little bit strange considering these are the Black Knife catacombs. But Twin Sages are particularly well positioned within the Academy to act as spies, like the Carolus and Olivinus Conspectus study sorceries associated with Azur and Lusat's legacy. Haima is about a specific application of Glintstone magic, and the Lazuli Conspectus studies Carrion magic. You join a house, a frat house, and focus on a specific branch of studies. But the members of the Twin Sage Conspectus were permitted to study sorceries of all kinds, meaning they could cozy up to everybody and snoop around every faction. So, I think the implication here is that this particular Twin Sage was working with Fia's organization and spying on the Carrions on Rogier's behest. And remember at the very beginning of the video, when I was talking about the standard interpretation of Fia's questline, I mentioned her father, Lionel, the Lion-Hearted. Well, we're going to talk about him now. Besides Rogier, Lionel is the other named character among Fia's champions. But that's not all that's connecting these two characters, Rogier and Lionel. Like, they're both sorcerers and champions of Fia, and Lionel casts Rancor Call, which can be found in Stormveil, right before the Prince of Death, where Rogier got blighted. And Lionel also casts Fia's Mist, meaning he could fill the role of the third party who would have assisted Rogier in getting blighted in the first place. And, well, the crest on Lionel's cape is kind of a Three Musketeer crest. With 3 raised rapiers or some other trusting sword. And who else is another trusting sword wielding sorcerer who's already been connected to Lionel? That's right, it's Rogier. Like, we had already figured out Rogier knew Fia from before we met them, but we didn't really know how far back they'd known each other for. So, given all these connections, I think the game is implying that Rogier and Lionel were already allies when Lionel found Fia in Leyndell. You know, that's where we get both the deathbed dress and Lionel set, with the crest on it already, meaning Fia and Rogier go back a long time. Okay, so, that's 2 out of 3 musketeers, right? And just to be clear, I don't mean actual musketeers as in the story that we have in our world. That's just a reference that I'm using. But the 3 rapiers are there, meaning 3 people, right? What about the third one? Well, we don't get to actually meet the third musketeer, but I think the game tells us about them anyway. There's the encampment in Lingrave where we find the great épée, which is another trusting sword, right? And in that camp, we also get the Royal House Scroll, which is a sorcery scroll of the Carian royal family that teaches you a couple of Carian spells. And do you know who casts that kind of spell around that place? Well, nobody. Yup. There are two mages there, but they're not from the Lazuli Conspectus, they're not Carianites. What's this royal scroll doing there? Well, Selene is also close by, right? Literally next door. And she was working for Rani through Selvis, as I have explained before. So, this may be a little speculative, but I think this scenario means that the third musketeer, who is indicated by the great épée, was spying on Rani, which is indicated by the royal scroll, which is by associating themselves with Selene, which is indicated by the doll in Selvis's basement, which in turn means this particular spy was captured by Rani, explaining how she knows somebody was spying on her by the time Rogier tells you to do it. Right? Like, this third musketeer scenario is quite speculative. I will give you that. But there is a third character to be found, and it explains, and the connections are there. It's a bit loose, but the connections are there. And now for the very last bit of this video, we're almost there. We're gonna get into the piece of lore that really caught me by surprise. This one was like, wow. So, first, let's ask ourselves a question. Why did Fia and Rogier have a change of heart? Like, Rogier worked with the Golden Order fundamentalists, hunters of those who live in death. And Fia worked with Leyndell in trying to restore Godwyn the Golden. So, what made them switch sides? Well, there doesn't really seem to be a catalyst for Fia. She is the champion of the meek. Okay, and you may sympathize with that. Sure, but what made her go in that direction? The game doesn't seem to provide an answer for that. Rogier, on the other hand, is hinted by the game to have been in a much better position to have envisioned their new ideology. He was a scholar with extensive knowledge regarding the teachings of the Golden Order, and this is what he tells you about that subject. The very notion of life in death defies the Golden Order. By this account, these defiled fiends must be expunged. But, truth be told, I seek the curse mark to save them. You may find this peculiar, but I discovered something in my examination of the Knight of the Black Knives. These souls have committed no offense. They have every right to life. Only they happen to touch upon a flaw in the order. So, here, you already have a much more practical, much more reasonable path for him to at least come to a better understanding regarding the nature of those who live in death, which is more than what we can say about Fia, right? But that still leaves us with the assumption of empathy as his sole catalyst. And that's not entirely compatible with how the game describes his psyche, or his personality, saying Rogier spent his entire life behaving with utter detachment. No one noticed the anger, grief, regret, or fear that existed along with it. And while I do believe he had genuine sympathy, which is demonstrated by his act of sacrifice. I think fear was the driving force behind his cause. And I also don't think his solidarity was aimed at the funny skeletons we associate with those who live in death. I think his empathy was toward his own kind. Like, as a death scholar, he was in a good position to realize that the concept of those who live in death doesn't just apply to the skeletons rising from the ground. Do you know who else lives in death? Pretty much everybody else in the lands between. All the nobles shambling through the roads and all the soldiers patrolling the battlefields. These undead beings are the pitiful product of unending life. Do you know who else lives in death? We do. We do. All the tarnished, abandoned by grace, exiled to die a literal death, very real death, in a foreign land, only to be brought back to life and guided back to the lands between so they could keep fighting in the name of those who had deemed to control their fates. You, me, Rogier, Fia, and all other tarnished we get to meet, and the other tarnished that we don't, we are those who live in death. And Rogier had first-hand experience watching the good and the great being reduced to raving fanatics, hunting down those they had branded as an absolute evil, and he saw the writing on the wall. One day this evil too will be defeated. And one day the usefulness of the tarnished will have been spent once more. And on that day we will become the defiled things who must be expunged. We fought for them and were exalted for it, and when peace was at hand, they banished us. They need us again, so we fight again, and then they will banish us again. It's merely a cycle. Stand before the Elden Ring, become the Elden Lord. First they came for the skeletons, and they then came for me. And now, with that out of the way, we need to go back to Fia a little bit, because the game may not tell us why she had a change of heart, but it does give us a scattershot hint as to the period when that may have happened. You see, Lionel reunited with Fia in Leyndell, and that's where we find her regular deathbed dress. So it is implied then that she abandoned her previous ways after she was reunited with her father. We don't know when, but it's implied that it happened after that point in time. And like I said before, at that point in time, Lionel already wore the musketeer crest, so it's also implied that Rogier and Lionel knew each other from before Fia was reunited with her father and had her change of heart. But here's the thing. The fact Lionel is Fia's father isn't presented by the game as if it were an actual fact. When this chivalrous, dauntless knight met Fia, who had been driven from her home, he declared himself to be her father. And what you may notice here is that the game isn't saying he was her father. The game is saying he declared himself to be her father. The only reason we quote-unquote know Lionel is Fia's father is because he said so. We never hear about Fia looking for her long-lost parents We don't hear about her recognizing Lionel as her father after he told her that. We all just have to take his word at face value and trust that he could never possibly lie about something like that. Right? He's so chivalrous and so dauntless after all, according to his own words. Rogier is a scholar, a spy master, and an explorer. Much more than Fia, he had both the means and the reasons to create their current organization. When Lionel told Fia he was her father, he wasn't pledging himself to her cause. She didn't even have a cause yet. When he told her that, they were recruiting her to theirs. The greatest misconception regarding Fia's questline is that it was hers to begin with. She's a figurehead, a useful puppet. She plays a pivotal role, yes, but the Age of the Duskborn? It was Rogier's questline all along. So, this was the end of another one, another complex one. A bit hard to explain this one. A lot of moving parts. As always, hopefully I made myself clear enough. I like this one. It has a more personal touch in regards to the characters involved, I think. And it gets into the weeds of how people work. It's a cool aspect of the story, I guess. And Fia is just cool, right? So it's nice to learn about her. Rogier too, everybody loves Rogier. Yeah. Some things I need to mention here. I would like to mention Taylor from Patreon. He was actually the inception point for me to get all of this together when he asked me about the Mark of the Centipede. Right? Because I had mentioned in my videos before that they had stored Godwin's curse mark inside the round table hold, and then he pointed out to me, well, but didn't they find the mark in the village, in the Summonwater village? And I was like, oh shit, I forgot about that. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a redaction incoming. That's, yeah, that just makes sense, right? They found the mark in the village, not the hold. So I was like, okay, this is just something I got wrong. This is something that I will have to address. It will be a redaction at some point. And the question that I had was like, how much will I have to change, right? About my previous theories. Does this affect something else around it? Or is just this detail, this particular detail that I'll have to redact? So I started looking into it, right? And the question wasn't whether or not I was wrong about it. The question was how wrong I was about it, right? And that's what I was trying to ascertain. But then in the process of doing that, I realized, oh, I wasn't wrong at all. Yay! Like, by accident, I was convinced that I had gotten that wrong, but it turns out that I hadn't. So, yeah, that's nice. And it all started with a question, as always. Questions are great. I would also like to mention Tyler real quick, because he made an interesting point to me, pointing out that Mikila's delegating habits they go hand in hand with his charming habits. He mentioned that at some point, and it was nice. Okay. Yeah, so that's that. The video is done, and thank you everybody for having watched it. We're almost at the end of this new series of videos, of episodes on Elden Ring lore. There's one more lore video planned, written, and about to be recorded. It's going to be our first Elden Ring lore dump. I made lore dumps for Dark Souls, right? Smaller theories, like tiny bits of lore that don't require a video of their own, so I group them together into a lore dump. And I'm probably already uploading the debate parlor episodes as well. And I'm currently waiting for the Night Rain shit show to start. I'm probably going to talk about that soon, before this video comes out, on time travel. And yeah, thank you for having watched this one. Thank you as always to all my patrons. Thank you guys very fucking much. Sinclair Lore, Balan, Liu Vampire, Sam D, Hubal, Taylor Reed, Medium Hat, Logan, that's always a great name to say, Derp, Devo, Brain Douche, Mr. Pudding, Kyle Van Reaper, and Tom Sparks. As always, I hope everybody's doing well enough. Shit is fucked out there, not gonna lie. I hope these videos can provide at least a little bit of distraction. I hope they don't distract you too much. I don't want to be a part of the problem. But we all need some time from the stress and the psychosis of real life. So yeah, hopefully this helps a little bit. Stay safe, please do stay safe, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.